Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Build on Strength podcast, where it's all about putting your potential into practice. And this episode is going to be a little bit different than anything I've done to this point, and I'm hoping it's something I'm going to continue to do in the future as long as I can entrap more people into being part of the podcast. So, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome with my brother-in-law, Tyler Yocca. And the fun thing is he has no idea what the topic is. I just asked him, hey, would you be willing to be part of the podcast? He's never done it before. He's a big fan of podcasts. And we'll see how it goes. I think you guys will enjoy it. So, are you ready for the topic?
The authentic, no preparation.
Yes.
I'm going to throw you a topic podcast.
Are you ready for the topic?
I'm ready.
You have to wait.
Last words.
Yep. This is your last chance to escape the podcast altogether. So, the topic today is something called imposter syndrome.
All right.
So, this will be the fun part. What do you think imposter syndrome is?
I would think imposter syndrome, knowing your show, is when somebody is trying to act from maybe a role model or somebody else's strengths that they look up to, and they see that person and they kind of idealize them and then try to mimic their actions and behaviors to get to a similar result.
Not bad. That's what I thought it was too.
Oh, okay.
It's not that.
Wow.
So believe it or not, it's not that. So this came out of a talk that I did a couple weeks ago. Actually, it's probably like a month ago now. And so we were doing some like strengths work with this kind of leadership group. And this guy said, hey, I really think this could help with people who suffer from imposter syndrome. And this doesn't happen to me too often in this space, but I was like, what is that? And the guy went on to explain it because I had the exact same reaction. I was like, oh, okay, people who think they're good at one thing, but they're actually not, or they're trying to be somebody that they're not, right? And it turns out imposter syndrome is actually something that people suffer from where they have this sense of not being good at stuff, or almost like even the things they're good at, they're not aware of. So it's this kind of crazy thing. And I started reading some articles about it. And apparently there's people who get like tons of anxiety around going to work because they actually have this feeling like I'm going to get found out. And people are going to find out I'm not who I said I was. I'm not who they thought I was,
right.
And they're going to realize that basically I have no idea what I'm doing at my job.
Interesting.
So I don't know. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced that? Have you ever had a job where you kind of felt that way?
Probably all the time. I think that's like, honestly, I think that a lot of times, especially when you're starting something new, you kind of have that feeling a little bit. I know currently it's like, I want to work with a new technology. I'm a tech guy, and I'm like, okay, hey guys, this new technology is really cool. Like I want to implement it. And they're like, all right, sweet, go for it. I'm like, crap, I have no clue how to do this. I just thought it was a good idea. And then, so I guess, biting off a little bit more than I can chew and then figuring it out as I go. I think that initial stage, I get that feeling a little bit like, what if somebody calls me out and is like, hey, how do you do that? And I have to tell them I have no clue how to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of had this thought as I was going through it. I was like, I think a lot of people probably experience this in like small ways.
Right.
Whereas, I guess if you would be kind of technically I don't know if it's something you diagnose as much of it's just something that you experience. Mm-hmm. It's actually something where like you experience tons of anxiety. Like, and it's not oh wow, like, maybe they'll ask me a question I don't know. It's like, no, people are going to find out like I'm a fraud. Like I shouldn't be here.
Like, it is
I've been lying my way through my job for 10 years. Like it's like extreme.
It's the psychological disorder almost. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Like it gets really bad apparently.
Huh. Interesting.
So it's really, there's actually a Times article that I'll probably link in the show notes or something, but it was really interesting because it goes into it a bit about kind of like some of the statistics. Apparently it's more common in women than it is in men, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
They didn't really give a lot of reasons why that might be the case. They just kind of talked about that a little bit. But I know it's really interesting. And I kept thinking back to when I was doing application support, and it was just like, oh my gosh, I don't think I am the right person for this, right? Yeah. I think I'm terrible at everything. And, on top of just not wanting to be there at all,
right.
It was this constant fight of like, wow, I feel like I'm not the guy for this job. That's really
so interesting. I mean, it's interesting because that whole thing is an internal monologue, right? That you're just going through your head. Like, there's probably nothing like, I don't know. I wonder if there's anything externally that like triggers that for people to have that feeling, or if it's, it is completely brought on by just your own head trash.
Right.
Basically.
Well, I think it's partially because a lot of people have no concept of like what value they bring. So it's that complete unawareness of what your strengths are, what your natural abilities are, what your, I guess I kind of throw around this idea of like, what's your value proposition?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
As a person. And so I don't know. I think it's interesting if you have no clue what your value proposition is, if you don't understand that even in a role you don't feel like you're super well trained for, or you have a lot of experience for, if you don't have a self-awareness, or you don't think there's something you can bring to that, regardless of that, that's probably where it sets in. Right. I would think.
Right. Yeah. I mean, without having that grounding, that personal grounding or that personal awareness, you're really just like wishy-washy, right? All over the board. Every time like a challenge hits you that you're not prepared for, it's all of a sudden you probably get pulled back into that vacuum of your own internal monologuing of like, oh, this is just confirming one more thing that, right. I'm not good at. So I
think, I don't know. So what are your thoughts? So if somebody might be listening to this and they think they have imposter syndrome, what would you think they should do?
First steps.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah. Find a close friend and maybe just tell them that you feel like that. It's just like, even if they don't have to be in the organization, at all, it doesn't have to be one of your work buddies, just somebody to, soundboard off of and just say, hey, I'm experiencing this at work. Cause I think probably 9 times out of 10, you're going to find out that's like not as uncommon as you think it is. Right. Cause I think everybody gets in their head that they're the only one, that is suffering from this to whatever degree. Like you said, it can be really psychological over the course of 10 years or a little bit incrementally. And I think that getting somebody just to soundboard that off of so that you can break up your own, own internal thoughts.
Isn't it interesting though? Like how I don't know. One of the things that always stuck out to me was like in marketing classes, they always said perception is reality, right? So it's like, it almost doesn't matter how realistic your thoughts are. The fact that you perceive things a certain way, like actually creates that reality for you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good suggestion though, because most people live in their head so much, right? They don't externalize all the way they're feeling about stuff like that. And so just even saying it to somebody, I don't know, like I'm an externalizer, and there's even times where I'll have like stuff going on in my head, and it's like the second I go to say it, it's like, that's the dumbest thing ever. I don't like it. Just like when it came out of my mouth, I realized how stupid it was.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm an internalizer. So I probably go through the reverse of that, where it's, I get trapped because I have a problem, like finally getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to externalize this. And so I get down that rabbit hole in my head for a long time. And I think a lot of what it has to do with is, it's kind of what's your sight set on, or what's your aim? Because once it's what do they call it, attention blindness. Whatever you have your attention on is what your like entire focus becomes, and so you only see things related to where your attention is. Oh, right. And I'm sure that's something Gary Vee probably has talked about multiple times that I've picked up, and a couple other guys talk about it. But
I think that's a Jordan Peterson thing, isn't it? He talks about that.
Probably.
Isn't that that's the video with like the soccer players?
Oh, right.
Like, and how many times did they pass the ball? Yeah, and it's like
right.
Did you see the bear?
And I think that internally or in your work, you do the exact same thing. It's like, you're in the middle of a project, you have your sight set on that, this is what my boss expects from me. And everything else gets filtered out or funneled through that lens.
Yeah,
An
'cause
interesting
then-
concept.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about that, if you're constantly focusing on the things that you're not good at and feeling like you're always going to get exposed for not being good at that,
Right.
and then that anxiety and everything's going to just continue to perpetuate that and make it worse and make it worse. And it's going to continue to, so the more anxious you are about that stuff, I'm sure the more you
Right.
don't do it well.
Right. Well, speaking of Jordan Peterson, things that he talks about it, the Pareto distribution, right, is like the more positive, the more negative, whatever it is that you get more of, whether it's physical or, non-physical, you tend to accumulate more of that stuff as you move forward. So it's interesting to take that concept, because it can either really help you in a positive way by like, small victories. Hey, I got this task done, and all of a sudden I have 100 tasks done. Or it can really screw you when it's like, hey, I had this negative thought, and then all of a sudden I'm a total failure and ready to like quit my job because I bring no value. So it's just interesting how you can get really trapped if you don't have people around you to help you.
So if you'd sum up what are your thoughts now that we've actually gotten to talk about
imposter
syndrome, right? What do you think? What are your thoughts? How would you summarize what we talked about?
So, first off, imposter syndrome is something that everybody experiences. Everybody at some point in their life is going to have that feeling of, hey, I'm going to be exposed for not knowing what I'm doing to whatever degree. I think no matter how long, the longer you let it go on, the worse it can get. So some practical steps to get you off that, if you think that's you, is to just find somebody to hold you accountable, or, somebody that you're close with, and just say, hey, I'm suffering with this. Can you help me, basically? And see what they have to say back to you, and realize that, this is an in your head syndrome. Nobody actually feels like this about you. If they did, they would probably have told you already.
Right.
So, I think that you're your own worst critic. And so, break that fear.
Yep. So figure out your strengths, talk to somebody about it, and stop focusing on the negative, huh?
Right.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks. Thanks for being the first guest on the random people from my life being part of the podcast.
Well, and
series.
Thank you for bringing me in my first podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Very good.
When does it end?